Meanwhile, on the comic box. Comics. Hey everyone, welcome to the Comic Box, part of the Geek to Geek podcast network. I'm Rob, your friendly neighborhood comic geek, and I'm back. We were on an unplanned break last week. It honestly came down to scheduling stuff. I wanted to do an episode about Luke Cage, and then I realized that episode needs to have Void in it because we did our pre-episode to Luke Cage with him where he was asking questions and stuff. And then I want to do an episode, if I'm going to review it, I want somebody else with me, and I think he's the right guy. And so now it's just down to scheduling stuff. And we're doing our best, but both of us are very busy. And so that is coming, hopefully this week, hopefully within a week of you guys hearing this. Plus, I'm doing another episode with Liam. Everybody remembers Liam. Last time he was on was for the San Diego Comic-Con episode. We're going to do a New York Comic-Con episode and go through all of the trailers, dig into some of the cool stuff that came out of the New York Comic-Con. So that is also coming. Also potentially within a week, so I think it was good to take the 1 week off, if only to save my space on the server. Because when I first started signing up for how much server space I had, I was doing, 15, 20-minute episodes, and obviously the show has grown beyond that. In any case, let's move into my weekly geekery, and then we'll get through some news and reviews for the week. So what I've been doing is I finished reading The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina via Hoopla, and I'll review that later, but yes, that is Sabrina the Teenage Witch, and this is not your TGIF version of the character. I did watch all of Luke Cage, obviously. I did enjoy it. I will hold the rest of my comments. All I'll say is there were a lot of Easter eggs I didn't notice, so I have a big list of cool Easter eggs, and then some deeper thoughts on the show as well. And last weekend, like I said in the last show, I did go down to Iowa and work at a haunted house called the Circle of Ash. Had an absolute blast. Saw a lot of people that I haven't seen in 2 years. So that was a very good, if exhausting, weekend. But I was happy to go and do it. Oh, there's pictures on my Twitter. Go to my personal Twitter, @Noby, @KNOWBY. And I think I have at least a couple pictures up from the haunt. Otherwise, I think they're just circleofash.com. or something like that. If you search them or look them up on Facebook, then you can see some pictures from that as well. So I also did read the Castle of the Bat trade that I was telling you guys about, which is a cross between Batman and Frankenstein. But again, that's for reviews. That's pretty much it. Like I said, I've been very busy this past week, or 2 weeks, I suppose I should say, really. I started playing Borderlands 2, I guess, is my other little geekery. I haven't gotten really deep into it, but I had one session with a couple of friends, and that was a really good time. All right, enough for the weekly geekery. The weekly geekery. Let's get into some comic book news with a bop-a-doop-doo-twain, da-ba-da-ba-down-da-da-do-do-da-do-do-da-ba-doop-a-doop news. Let's start on Marvel Comics, the comics of Marvel. Just a couple small things. Most of these news snippets are things that I pulled from New York Comic-Con news, but they are just not related to videos or anything like that. So first, the original Nova, Richard Rider, is coming back to comics in, I believe, a new series. I'm not clear on the explanation for how all of that happened. But in any case, if you're a fan of the original Nova, he's back, and it looks like he will be sharing the comic book with current, much younger Nova, Sam Alexander. I hope I said that name right. Also, hey, while we're talking young characters, if you're a fan of the old Runaways comic, the character of Alex Wilder is going to be back in the pages of Marvel in the Power Man and Iron Fist book. I'm not going to say more about what his role will be because it's spoilers for Runaways, but if you have read Runaways, you probably have an idea of what his role might be. Last bit of news for Marvel Comics is there is a comic book coming out called Deadpool the Duck. That's pretty much all I know, and there's a cover. I'm guessing it's supposed to be like a Howard the Duck thing, but Deadpool. So, all of the silliness that you would come to expect from a Deadpool comic. 2 bits of Marvel movie news. First up, we know that the Wasp, who will be in the upcoming Ant-Man and the Wasp, will not be in Infinity War, but will be in Avengers 4, which I'm guessing is what was previously Infinity War Part 2, which now does not have a title currently. To me, that's just more signs that something's going down in Infinity War. We will probably be losing some characters, partly due to contracts, partly just because maybe those actors want to do something else, and hopefully partly because it's good storytelling, and will yet again, just like we did at the end of Age of Ultron, as we get sort of a new Avengers team, where we had Cap's team and then Iron Man's team. I feel like this might be sort of the same thing, where we're going to have the fallout from Infinity War and see a new Avengers team come out from that that'll then take the series forward. Also, and this is really interesting, there might be more Blade stuff coming. I don't know if it's TV or movies, but I put it in the movie section. In a panel for the upcoming Underworld movie that's coming out in January, somebody asked Kate Beckinsale if they'd ever consider doing a Blade Underworld crossover, which is kind of ridiculous because they're totally different universes, but they all have to do with vampires. And she said no, they had actually talked about it or looked at it or something, and she just said they're doing something with Blade. So that could just be that the rights are tied up somewhere else, or the fact that Underworld is Sony and Blade, I believe, is still Fox. So it could just be that, or it could be that there's a Blade project that we're not supposed to know about that's hidden away somewhere. Who knows if that'll be Wesley Snipes coming back or not. Marvel TV news. We have a villain for the Defenders. We don't have a character yet, but we have an actress. The villain is going to be Sigourney Weaver, of all people. And again, we don't know who it is, but there's an article over at IGN that threw up some options. Some of them seemed weird, or they were female versions of male characters like Silvermane or Dario Agger, who is this half-Minotaur dude from the current Thor run, which seems like a stretch to me. They also suggested Viper, maybe another sort of crime boss. And my personal favorite, and I hope this is the case because it would be awesome, is Mon Nucci, spelled Gnucci, who is a mob boss from the Punisher comics and is just this rotten old woman and made for a very entertaining villain. So that would be fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. Next, we know that Karen Page from Marvel's Netflix's, how do they call that? Is it just Marvel's Daredevil on Netflix, or do they call it Marvel's Netflix Daredevil? In any case, a little bit of a role with that character in season 2, but we know that Karen Page will be in Punisher, and Madame Gao, also from Daredevil, is going to be one of the villains in Iron Fist, or at least appear, and we know that from the trailer. I don't want to get too much into that, because that's one of the things I'm going to be talking about with Liam, but very cool. So we are getting more connections between our different shows outside of just the character of the Night Nurse. Rosario Dawson's character. Also, there might be, a lot of these things are maybes because it's a Comic-Con, so they just throw teases at you. There might be some crossover between Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and the Netflix shows, or they might at least reference one another. I'm hoping that that's at least the case. I feel like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. seems to be, and I've only seen a couple episodes so far, seems to be a much brighter show. The Netflix very much seemed to be much darker. All we know is somebody asked Marvel TV head Jeff Loeb during a panel, and he just said, stay tuned. And that's it. And that's all we're getting. So I assume something's going to cross over. If you have big superhero-related stuff happening in New York, that inevitably some of that would have to at least be mentioned in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. if they're supposed to exist in the same universe. DC Comics. Here's something interesting. Wildstorm was its own imprint for a while, its own comic book publisher, own comic book company, and it had Wildcats, and honestly, Wildcats is the main one that I remember from Wildstorm. But in any case, eventually they merged with the DC Universe, and I believe it was the New 52, where they started introducing versions of their characters, Overwatch and Apollo and Midnighter. Was that Wildstorm, I believe? And those sorts of characters, they were sort of wrapping them into the regular DC universe. Well, now it seems like they're heading back on their own in a sub-imprint called Wildstorm. So Wildstorm is coming back, and my guess is it's not going to interact with the rest of the DC Comics universe proper. So we know for sure that their flagship title is going to be called The Wild Storm, and we know that the imprint is going to be headed up by Warren Ellis, who wrote The Authority, which was also a Wildstorm book, if I remember correctly. I'm guessing it must be. So if you're a Warren Ellis fan, I like some of his stuff, not all of his stuff. He is going to be heading up that book, I believe. And I didn't mention this before, there is another existing sub-imprint of DC that came out recently called Young Animal, which is a very weird name for a sub-imprint, but it's basically odd comics or weird comics like Doom Patrol or Shade the Changing Girl, which is a new take on Shade the Changing Man. So these very sort of out there books, if that's sort of your thing, DC Comics is trying to cater to that through the Young Animal imprint. And then Wildstorm is going to be what Wildstorm was before, I guess. They didn't really spell out exactly what they're doing, but if you were a Wildstorm fan and a Wildcats fan, I'm assuming that's going to come back as well. There you go. We are getting another of the TV meets comics, if you will. I think the last one I talked about was Wonder Woman meets the Bionic Woman, perhaps. This one is going to be Batman 66 meets Wonder Woman 77. I think out of all of the different ones, this is the most inevitable. And clearly they've been doing well with these comics. So if you are a fan of the Batman 66 comic, the Wonder Woman 77, or any of their, Batman 66 meets the Green Hornet, and all of these different crossover comics, another one is coming your way. We're also getting a new Batwoman comic that's going to start in March of 2017 following a one-shot in February. And again, when we say February, that's actually a comic that's going to release in January. It just has the cover of February. That's just sort of the way comics work these days. So currently, the Batman books are doing this Night of the Monster Men crossover. I think that's going on right now. And so this is sort of the aftermath where blood, I think, from the monster creatures is being used as a bioweapon. And so Batwoman is sent on a mission around the world to stop that from happening, to stop them using it as a bioweapon. I've always liked the Batwoman character, the way it was introduced in, I want to say the 52 maxi series, the weekly series, and then spun off obviously into its own series with awesome, amazing art. But a lot of that book was about the art rather than the writing for me or the content. It was just so pretty. I like the stories, but the art was obviously the big draw. And when they changed artists, I sort of dropped off. But Batwoman has always been the Batman family comic that deals a little more with supernatural stuff, monsters, and that sort of thing. So if that is your jam, that's coming out in March. I might pick up the first issue just to let you guys know my thoughts. But moving into DC movie news, we're getting a biopic about the life of the man who created Wonder Woman, who, if you're unaware, is also sort of famous for having invented a precursor to the lie detector test, which makes sense with the whole lasso of truth and stuff. And then also led a very, very interesting life. He was, as I understand it, polyamorous. He had 2 women in his life, and they all lived together in the suburbs, and was into some very different things, some of which may have leaked into the early Wonder Woman issues. So that will certainly be an interesting flick. And then it sounds like we're also going to get a standalone Wonder Woman animated movie, which makes sense, obviously, with the other new live-action movie coming out. I just wonder if it's going to come close to being as good as the existing animated one, because back when DC started putting out their standalone animated films, one of the ones they did was Wonder Woman, and it is really good. So certainly go check that out. Get it wherever you're able. I can't imagine it's very expensive because it's been out for several years now. But we'll see what this one turns into. It might be something that's meant to be more girl-friendly, where it's a brighter, happier thing. It might be something that's meant to just very much tie into the movie or give more backstory to the movie character. Who knows? I'm spitballing there. But looking forward to that as well. We do know the next animated one out of DC, I believe it's the next one, is Justice League Dark. And at New York Comic Con, they showed some footage, which we didn't get to see, but you can read about it online. And it looks like this one's going to have the Jon Stewart Green Lantern and Hawkman, which will be the first time that we have seen those characters in this sort of post-rebooted animated universe, where a lot of these different Batman and Robin, Batman versus Robin, Batman, Bad Blood, and some of the different Justice League movies we've been getting all have the same cast and animation style. So this will be the first time we're actually seeing Jon Stewart and Hawkman in this particular animated universe. Also very cool, Constantine obviously in it, because it's the Justice League Dark. Going to be voiced by Matt Ryan, who played the live-action Constantine in that self-titled show on NBC that only lasted a season, and then he played that same character in an episode of Arrow. So if you liked his portrayal of Constantine, we're getting him voicing the animated version, which is kind of cool. It seems like very much fan service, but I dig that. The Justice League movie, couple little tidbits. One, we have a still frame of Mera from the Justice League film. This is Aquaman's wife, Queen of Atlantis. So you can Google that. It's honestly the quickest way to find it, rather than me providing a link to an article that you scroll through just to see the picture. And then we also got a behind-the-scenes video of the filming of Justice League as they wrapped up filming in the UK. It's on Zack Snyder's Twitter. I will provide a link in the show notes for that. Looks like a lot of green screen stuff. And what's interesting here is, since it's behind-the-scene footage, you actually get to see the color that we know we won't get to see in the actual movie. So you actually get to see what things really look like before he turns the whole thing gray and blue. DC TV news. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff out as some of the shows are starting to come back. Flash has had an episode, possibly 2 by the time you hear this. Arrow has had at least 1 episode out. So I'm not going to get into that. I feel like that's just a deep hole that I might not be able to crawl out of once I move into the TV stuff. I might mention big things. And we are going to talk about the sizzle reel for Legends of Tomorrow that shows a whole bunch of different DC characters. And I love that they're doing that. It's just I'm worried that this podcast is getting so long. So if that's a thing you guys want me to do, if you guys want me to cut back on comic book news or movie news and talk more about the shows because they're actually airing, more than happy to do it. Or I can make them a topic of the week and talk about what I think of those shows thus far, the 1, 2, or how many seasons each show has. But for now, we're going to call that good for news. Let's talk some reviews, you guys, with reviews. That was hip, y'all. Not really. All right, I have 2 weeks worth of reviews, so we are going to do this as quickly. I don't like saying as quickly as possible. I don't want you guys to think that I'm skipping out and not writing proper reviews, but we will coast through these. First, I have Green Lanterns number 8. It's a Halloween episode, so this is the second one that sort of focuses on more the characters and the character interactions than the action that's going on, and I enjoy it as, you know, the break that it is, and we get a little hint of the ongoing story as well, of course. But as I've said before, I hope that that's what this one does. I would love to see a more grounded, relationship-based, not soap opera-y when I say that, not, you know, pretty white kids with problems on the CW kind of level of relationships, but something that's a little more relatable than the giant bombastic space action. So enjoying Green Lanterns number 8. Speaking of that, Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps number 6 is all bombastic space action, where Hal Jordan is taking on the entirety of the Sinestro Corps, or many members of the Sinestro Corps, and apparently having a blast while doing it. And I like that. That's very pure Hal Jordan. So I like that they're getting back to sort of that version of the character where he is way too full of himself. It seems odd because normally we see, you know, a Sinestro Corps member that's Yellow Lantern versus a Green Lantern, and that can in itself be enough of a challenge, but apparently the rest of the Sinestro Corps are not good at their jobs because Hal is plowing through them until he comes face to face with an extremely overpowered Sinestro. So maybe next issue is the final one. I think I had predicted before that we would probably get 1 or 2 more issues of this fight going on, and the rest of the Corps is on their way but haven't made it there yet. So maybe next issue is the finale. Maybe they're going to stretch it out a little more. So long as it's full of action and it's big and it's fun and serves as that balance to Green Lanterns, I'm fine with it. Wonder Woman number 8, we're taking a break, actually. We've been hopping back and forth between a modern storyline and a past sort of origin story. And in this one, we take a... what is it called? It's not an epilogue. It's not an interlude. We take an interlude to look into the past of Cheetah, Dr. Minerva. Is that her first name or her last name? Shoot. In any case, we see her before she becomes Cheetah, and so you learn a little bit about her life and that she's this incredible linguist and archaeologist who is looking for existence of the Amazons. And then there's the hint that she sees sort of find somebody that has this tree tattoo on them that the followers of the big bad from the first arc had, the one that sort of caused her turning into Cheetah. And so it appears that that is what she is finding instead of Themyscira when she thinks she finds Themyscira. It was decent. Totally different art, which is fine because, again, we have, an interlude story. So give everybody a break because they've been putting a comic out every 2 weeks. But it was a good interlude. And if you're interested in the character of Cheetah at all, who honestly is one of two, maybe, if not the only villain anybody can name for Wonder Woman, she just doesn't seem to have that much of a developed rogues gallery. Read this comic. It's good. Next is Doctor Strange, and they're calling this Now because it's Marvel. So it's Now Doctor Strange because it's a Marvel Now. But in any case, issue 12, we're continuing with this new status quo of Doctor Strange having very limited magic. He's not this incredibly overpowered person. He gets into a fight with this creature that was created from the pain Doctor Strange should have been suffering while doing magic. The price that had to be paid, they just turned into this shadow creature that was living in, or locked really, in his basement of his home. And so it's out and causing havoc, and Doctor Strange is doing his best to fight it. And then Baron Mordo shows up, who appears to be, if not the villain, maybe a villain in the movie. And he still has all of his magic, despite every other magician and magic user not having it. There's that whole mystery of him claiming he was in another dimension while that was happening, and plot and things. Still hanging on with this comic. It's fun, but I'm waiting for it to hit the Thor God of Thunder levels of good that I know Jason Aaron is capable of. I'm kind of seeing that if this is supposed to be a back-to-basics, down-to-earth adventure story, we're not going to get that level of epic storytelling, which is a shame, because I kind of want to see that with a Doctor Strange book, not being a person who ever read a lot of Doctor Strange. So, good, but might need to really kick it up to keep me around long-term. Next up is Moon Knight number 7. Mark Spector is still losing his mind. This time it's jumping between him thinking he's a space fighter pilot protecting the last vestiges of humanity who live on the moon, and then him being a cabbie in New York and not knowing what's going on. I'm just reading a lot of confusing books these days. Between this and, Saga and Paper Girls. Same as always with Moon Knight. I love the character to death. I just hope that it's not this all of the time, because I need more plot than just we don't know what's happening. Next is Jessica Jones number 1. Good comic. Also feels back to basics. Feels like you could read the original Alias run if you go get it at the library or whatever, and then come straight to Jessica Jones number 1. And some of the gaps almost feel like they're being filled in. The beginning, she's being let out of prison for some reason. All of her super friends, if you will, folks in the super community that she knows, are upset at her, including her husband. This is spoilers, folks. So 3, 2, 1. Including her husband, Luke Cage. It's a spoiler. I don't know that it's happening in the Netflix show. But they have a daughter together, and that daughter is missing, and Jessica isn't telling anybody where that daughter is. Plot, but art, fantastic as it used to be. Story, fantastic as it used to be. Next is Great Lakes Avengers number 1. GLA Misassembled, I think, is the trade that I read that introduced me to the Great Lakes Avengers, who are a failed group of heroes, in finger quotes, who want to be part of the Avengers but are terrible. So we have Flat Man, who is kind of like Mr. Fantastic in that he can stretch, but he's flat all the time. And normally we think he's just flat all the time. In this one we find out he can turn into a normal, 3D human. It's just if he stretches, he has to be flat. So we find out that he had previously tried to trademark the name Avengers when he was trying to put together the Great Lakes Avengers. Then there was a legal snafu for some reason, and he actually gets the rights to call himself an Avenger and reform the Great Lakes Avengers. So he's trying to get the band back together, as it were. Here's the tagline from the book. They used to be Avengers. They weren't very good at it, and a bunch of them died. Maybe the world is finally ready for the Great Lakes Avengers. Bright colored book, art that matches that sort of bright tone. They're starting to set things up where they have a new headquarters that is awful, and it is down the street from a supervillain headquarters. So I'm kind of hoping it's going to be a short-lived series. I don't know that I'm reading this month to month, but if you're looking for something silly to read, this would definitely be up your alley. Otherwise, wait for trades, Maybe. I think fun books are more entertaining to read in trade because I think most books are easier and more entertaining to read in trade format. At the very least, go out and get your hands on GLA Misassembled to introduce yourself to the characters. I don't know that you need that as a primer for this series, but it was still entertaining, and that one had Squirrel Girl in it if you're a fan of Squirrel Girl. Next up, just for Professor Beej over on the Geek to Geek podcast, is Champions #1. And I hate to say this, but I may have to start reading a new comic every single month. I know next to nothing about any of these characters. It's the Miles Morales Spider-Man and the Kamala Khan Miss Marvel and the Sam Alexander Nova. And I don't know anything about these characters, but there is just something so refreshing about a team book featuring kids who aren't afraid to be honest with one another and then, maybe have fun and whatever. So it reminds me of the old Young Justice comic book, which is one of my favorite comics of all time. So for Professor Beej, yes, go and pick up this comic. Even if you want to read it in trades like many people do with lots of things, go pick up issue #1 and read it and enjoy it. You are looking forward to it. It is a thing for you to read. Moving into some indie comics, we have Paper Girls #10. The trip continues. Still fun. I'm worried I might have to back off and move into trades just like I do with Lazarus and all of the other complicated comics because I am just having trouble, you guys, keeping track of what's happening month to month. And also just because it's so confusing. And I know that's the point, but waiting a month, being confused for a month only to see another one be more confused. I feel like it's what people felt like when they watched Lost. I never watched the show, but I always heard it was, we got a question answered, and then they asked 3 more. What a frustrating show, but oh, I love it so much. That's Paper Girls. And there's a reason that people love it so much. So Paper Girls #10. Walking Dead 159. So we're continuing the Whisperer War. Negan is right in the middle of it, the guy who's going to feature so heavily into this season of the show. I'm not going to assume that any of this is spoilers for the show because it's so different at this point. But for years, Negan was held in prison in Alexandria after being defeated. And in this issue, he is finally reunited with his bat, the love of his life, his barbed wire wrapped bat. But then he breaks it on the current sort of leader of the Whisperers. And it's this interesting moment because this guy who's just super ultra tough guy has no idea what to do. Like his whole world gets shattered when this happens because that was his life, was this bat. That was the whole sign of his previous control over his people. And, it symbolized everything he was. So we're actually getting interesting character moments from Negan, which is very interesting. And then the battle continues on. The Black Monday Murders. I read issue #2. Issue 3 came out. I have not read it yet because it is a very long book. It's like 50 some odd pages. Or the first 2 issues were at any rate. But so issue #2 definitely slowed down from #1. They tried to introduce more characters to round things out. I kind of wish they hadn't. I don't need that many characters. I would very much rather see a comic with 4 characters than 10 because it can easily turn into a Game of Thrones thing where you're trying to remember who is who. Especially a book like this that jumps between decades and over a timeline with different family members, and you're trying to remember who's in what family and what role they play in the grand scheme of things. Blurg. But, very cool thing, if any of you guys read comics digitally, if you go to imagecomics.com, right now you can get the first 2 issues of the Black Monday Murders for just 99 cents each. Issue 3 is still $4.99, so my guess is it's either when the new issue comes out or maybe it's just after a certain number of weeks that the previous issues get cheaper digitally. But if you haven't read this and you're interested and you like what I've been saying about it, 99 cents, a 50-page comic, that is worth your money. At the very least, go pick up issue #1. But not you, Void. I know you listen to this. Not you. It's a horror book. I don't think it's up your alley. It is very interesting, but I don't see you being down with a bunch of black magic sacrifices and that sort of stuff. Other books that I read, like I said, I did read the Batman Frankenstein mashup book, Castle of the Bat. It is a very odd book. It is kind of cool art style. It very much fits the sort of classic tale. It's almost a painted art style. In this one, Bruce Wayne is the Dr. Frankenstein, and then his Alfred is his Igor, named Alfredo, his hunchbacked assistant. And I don't know how much I want to get into to spoil things. He creates a monster, but it is very sort of Batman-y how he decides to do it. And then faces off against sort of a villain. There is no iconic Batman villain that we get in this story. There is no Scarecrow, no Joker, nothing like that. So it's very much just a weird tale that happens to have sort of Batman-ish elements wrapped up into it. It's a fun read. I don't know that I buy it, but certainly go check it out at the library if they have it. And then I read the first volume of The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina that I got through Hoopla, so that I got from my local library. This is not the TGIF Sabrina, as I said. It's Satan-worshipping, cannibalism. The villain is Satan's mistress. Harvey Kinkle, if you remember the boyfriend from the show, he gets spoilers, I guess. Well, we'll just say bad things happen to Harvey Kinkle. So it is very much a darker book, but also very good, like surprising. I know I've read that people like the, Archie or Afterlife with Archie or whatever, where it's a horror comic set in the Archie universe. And so is this one, because you have Betty and Veronica, who apparently are training to be witches, like a very different sort of book. So part of you is like, oh, it's kind of fun because it's Sabrina and it's Archie comics. And I've never read an Archie comic before, but I read this one and I enjoyed it. Also probably not for Void, because Void, just nothing horror, I guess, for Void, because he can't handle horror stuff. For the record, big horror guy, this dude. You can't see me, but I'm pointing at myself. And that's our reviews. Poll list. Next week, I am looking at Dark Knight 3, The Master Race number 6, finally putting out another issue of that. I think I did the last one, issue 5. Maybe not. I don't know. Green Lanterns number 9, Doctor Strange 13, and Mighty Thor number 12. Shonk gonk 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 gonk. Bow. Ba 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 da ba ba doo down da ba da ba doo doo. Archives. Continuing our spooky books for October, I'm going to throw out some classic Vertigo stuff at you and suggest Alan Moore's Swamp Thing. I actually read the first 2 volumes of this book as part of my horror film class back in college. And currently they are loaned out to Liam, so I can't say that I'll read it for next week. I have to be honest, though, they weren't actually my thing at the time, and this was like 8 years ago, and I never went back to reread them. In general, I have trouble with the sort of classic horror art style where it's very painted, super artistic. A lot of the early issues of Hellblazer was like this as well. And it's just tough for me to do when I'm having trouble making things out. I will say, though, that the different art style, because it's horror, sometimes it does work out. So my other thing I'm going to throw out is another example of sort of a painted art style. The original 30 Days of Night, and I know you can get this, if not at your library, you can find it somewhere probably cheap, because there have been many, many sequels and 2 movies, one-shots. There's all sorts of 30 Days of Night things, but I'm going to say start with the original story. It's got the painted art style. It takes place in the town of Barrow, Alaska, where for 30 days the sun sets and doesn't come back up. So vampire heaven, right? So very interesting story. It was a cool take. And the important thing when it comes to horror is this was an interesting premise, which most horror movies and comics or whatever have, but few are able to execute properly. They just fall off the rails sometimes or fall upon tropes. This one was one where it has an interesting premise and delivers, so it is definitely worth your time. Bow. Topic of the week this week is patience. Because I know I got a Luke Cage episode coming, and I really want to get it to you guys. So, like I said, hopefully in the next week, maybe 2, I will have a Luke Cage episode that's just about Luke Cage. I will have the New York Comic Con trailer rundowns with Liam. That is just going to be about trailers. And we'll talk posters and stuff. There's the poster and some info out on the new Wolverine movie that's coming, the 3rd Wolverine movie titled Logan. And we will talk about that. So keep an eye out for that. And that is it for this week. We're going to keep it short. We're not going to do a deep dive into any sort of topic because I want to make sure I have enough server space that I can really go deep into Luke Cage and that sounded wrong, and the New York Comic Con stuff. So, as always, you guys, please, 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 star ratings and reviews on iTunes. It is the best way for other people to find this show, which is what we want to grow our sort of Geek to Geek podcast network community, which you can join in on Reddit. We have a subreddit. Look up Geek to Geekcast. I have some posts on there where we're talking comics, we're talking horror. Come talk to me, because I love engaging with you guys. You can also find me on Twitter at Rob's Comic Box, or I have a personal Twitter at Noby, at KNOWBY, if you'd like to see some not comic book related things that I throw out there. As always, you can go to geektogeekcast.net to sign up and look for updates on all of our Geek to Geek podcast shows. And lastly, I have an email, the, I guess, oldest way of getting a hold of somebody these days, because nobody's going to write me an actual letter. So if you want to send something long form to just me, you can get a hold of me at thecomicboxpodcast@gmail.com. And that's it for this week, you guys. I'm going to close the comic box. Keep an eye out for those special episodes. I am really looking forward to doing those. And I'll see you guys on Reddit. Bow, bow, ba-da-ba-ba-doo-down, way, ba-da-da-ba-da-ba-doom, the comic box. Got another episode done. Wasn't sure I'd get it 'cause so busy. But we got it done, and it's Halloween coming up. So excited, love me some October Halloween spooky stuff. Wow. Send me your pictures of Halloween decorations. That's it. That's my final thing. I just want to see what everybody else is doing, because it's awesome. And Halloween, costumes, everything. Oh, love this month.